Everyone's hanging out for rate cuts, so their borrowing power comes back. But what if I told you APRA has already capped your next deal before the first rate cut even lands? Hi everyone, this is Maddie and welcome to Australian Property Review. From 2026, a quiet little rule called the 6-time DTI cap means some Aussie investors will hit a hard wall, even in a falling rate world. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly what APRA's changed, who's in the firing line, and 3 numbers you can check today to see if this new rule could break your portfolio or barely touch you. There are really 2 big rules that now shape how much you can borrow in Australia. The 3% serviceability buffer, which is the old one, and the new one, the 6-time debt to income cap, with a 20% limit on how much business banks can write above that. Most of the headlines focus on crackdowns on high-risk loans, war on property investors, all that noise. Our job here at Australian Property Review is to ignore the noise and answer 3 simple questions. What has APRA actually changed? Does it really change what you can do over the next 5 to 10 years? And what adjustments do smart investors make so they're really planning inside the rules instead of getting smashed by them? First, quick refresher on the 3% buffer because it hasn't gone away. When you apply for a loan and your interest rate is, say, 6%, the bank doesn't just test you at 6%. By rule, they have to pretend the rate is about 9%. That's the buffer. And then ask, could this person still afford the repayments if rates went up by 3%? If the answer is no, your borrowing gets cut back. Why does this exist? Because without it, you end up with the classic story we've seen overseas. Too much debt, not enough income, and everything blows up when rates rise or incomes fall. So that 3% buffer is now a permanent feature of Australian lending. It's not a temporary tweak, it's baked into how banks think about risk. And this matters because the new rule we're about to talk about, the 6-time DTI cap, sits on top of this buffer. It doesn't replace it. Now, let's talk about the new piece, the debt to income cap or DTI. DTI is very simple. Add up all your loans, divide that by your gross annual income. If you earn $150,000 a year and you have $600,000 in total debt, your DTI is 4. If you earn $150,000 and have $900,000 in debt, your DTI is 6. From 2026, APRA has said banks we supervise can only let up to 20% of their new loans be at a DTI of 6 or above. A few important details. That 20% cap is tracked separately for owner-occupiers and investors. It applies to new lending, not the existing balance on your current loans. And again, it does not replace the buffer. It's an extra filter on top. So for any new loan, 2 things must now be true. You have to pass the higher buffered interest rate, and the loan can't sit inside a pool of high DTI lending that's bigger than APRA allows for that to lend up. That's the bit no one tells you in the headlines. Banks have a limited bucket of high DTI loans they're allowed to write. If you're always the person trying to live at a very top end of borrowing capacity, you're volunteering to stand in the smallest, most crowded part of that bucket. Now, does this mean half the country is about to get declined tomorrow? No, and this is where the nuance matters. Right now, only a minority of loans are above that six-time DTI line. Roughly around 10% of new investor loans and around 4% of new owner-occupier loans, both well under APRA's 20% cap. That's why you're not seeing banks slamming the door shut today. Many of them already sit comfortably inside the new limit. So why is APRA doing this? They're thinking ahead of the next cycle. When interest rates fall or banks soften other parts of their assessment, borrowing power usually jumps. People push harder, and the share of high DTI loans can spike pretty quickly. APRA is basically saying, we'd rather set the guardrail now than slam on the brakes later when everything's already overheated. For you as an investor, this is less about a sudden emergency and more about the rules of the game for the next decade. So, who's most exposed as this cap starts to matter more? Three groups stand out. Younger investors whose strategy is basically leverage hard now, my income will catch up later. Second would be high income professionals chasing 6, 8, 10 properties on very tight cash flow and hoping capital growth does the heavy lifting. And last would be investors in thin yield suburbs where the annual negative cash flow is already big compared to their income. If that's you, you're the person most likely to bump your head on the 6-time DTI limit as the cycle rolls on. Now, let's deal with the thing a lot of people are quietly thinking. Stuff it. I'll just go on to a non-bank lender and dodge APRA. Non-banks don't take deposits like the big banks, so APRA's cap doesn't hit them in the exact same way. But that does not make them a magical escape hatch. Common patterns we see is higher interest rates in exchange for that extra flexibility, policies that can change quickly if funding costs or areas arise. And in a tougher environment, you might have fewer refinance options if both the bank and the non-bank pulls back at the same time. Using a non-bank as part of a planned portfolio strategy can be smart. Using them as a last resort after everyone else has said no is how you build a debt trap. All right, let's make this practical. Here are 3 numbers you can check in the next 10 minutes to see how vulnerable you are to APRA's rules. Number 1, your DTI. Add up all your loans, divide by your gross income. If your DTI is under 5, you've generally got more wriggle room. Pushing up towards 6 though, you're moving into the crowded end where APRA's cap lives. This doesn't mean you must stop at exactly 5 or 6. It means you need to be intentional about where you're comfortable drawing your own line. Number 2 is cash buffer per property. How much cash do you actually have sitting in offset or savings per property? A basic rule of thumb a lot of investors use is 3 to 6 months of interest and essential holding costs per property. If you don't know this number, or it's less than a couple of months, that's a red flag. Number 3, your stress test rate. The bank already tests you about 3% above your actual rate. Smart investors go further. If your current rate is 6%, look at your portfolio at 9.5 or 10% and ask, could I survive this for a while without panic selling? If this spreadsheet only works at today's rate, it's not really working. These 3 numbers, DTI, buffer, stress test, are your personal guardrails. Think of APRA's rules as the floor. You want to be operating above that floor, not lying on it. So, what do you actually do with all this? A few practical shifts we're seeing from smarter investors. Yield matters more. Not every deal can be a low yield, high growth, deeply negative cash flow play. You need a better mix. Some growth markets, some stronger yield markets. So each loan is actually pulling its weight. Next one would be add value is back in fashion. Renovations, secondary dwelling, small developments, these can help you grow equity and cash flow without relying purely on the market to bail you out. Lender order is now strategic. Using big banks early while your DTI is still moderate, saving non-banks and niche policies for later when you genuinely need them. And most importantly, data, not vibes. Suburb level data on prices, rents, vacancy, local income. This is how you spot areas where debt, income, and yield are at least somewhat in balance. That's exactly the sort of thing we focus on here at Australian Property Review. Not just the headline, but the flow-on effect into actual borrowing decisions and suburb choice. Now, let's wrap this up with a quick action plan. Over the next week, I'd encourage you to firstly calculate your current DTI across all lenders. Second, work out your cash buffer per property in months, not dollars, and then run a quick stress test of your portfolio in a higher rate. Fourth would be talk to your broker about how APRA's DTI cap might affect your next refinance, your next purchase, and what lenders you should be using in what order. Then zoom out and ask, if borrowing stopped for me today, does my current portfolio still line up with my long-term goals? If the answer is no, or I'm not sure, that's your sign to tighten the plan, not just chase the next deal. If you found this breakdown helpful, this is literally what we do every week on Australian Property Review. We take the scary headline, turn it into plain English, and then show you what actually matters for your borrowing, your suburb, and your strategy. So hit like if you want more content on APRA, borrowing power, or lending policy. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive. Regulations will keep changing. Markets will cycle. The investors who come out ahead aren't the ones with the most aggressive leverage. They're the ones who understand the rules and keep adjusting the plan. You're here, you're learning. That already puts you ahead of the pack. Thank you for watching this video. See you in the next one.